Hello everybody. In this video we're going to be doing the review of episode 7 out of 10. So we're almost finished with Hitler's Circle of Evil series, and it's titled The Rise and Fall of Reinhard Heydrich. Now Heydrich, as you guys recall, I think it's the one that's associated with Captain America, Hydra and the enemy, right? Because Captain America kind of fights like the Nazis, especially in the first movie. So Heydrich is this guy who basically comes under Himmler's wing in the Nazi party, and he's basically the architect of the Jewish concentration camps, or what is known as the final solution to the Jewish problem, right? So they're completely racist policies and implementations that get done. And this episode kind of focuses specifically on Heydrich. It does mention Himmler, Goebbels at one point, Goering. It keeps going back and forth about how they are basically fighting their rivalry. But it focuses mainly on Himmler, and more specifically Heydrich and his ideologies and his plans and his implementations, and ultimately his assassination. He dies due to his injuries in an assassination attempt. So we begin by talking about Himmler and his racist thinking. And they mention how Heydrich is very clever. He knows exactly what he's doing. And his rise ultimately is making him a target to other people. Now, the people that try to assassinate him are not his own people. He's actually part of the inner circle, and the inner circle is actually kind of taken aback when he gets assassinated, when he dies. But other people, especially the Czechs, he makes big time enemies with the Czechs. I'll tell you why later on in the video. But they kind of jump back and forth in this episode because they're focusing on Heydrich, and they mention some things that they already mentioned before. But we start in September 1939. Goering is doing good, the Luftwaffe. He was skeptic at first, but now he's like, yeah, he's all for it. And that's basically it. I don't really know why they mention Goering at this point, maybe to contextualize it. But if you've been watching the episodes, you already know where they're at. You know that they mentioned this part again, Goering and Hitler taking France, and Goering being named the Reichsmarshal, the second in command. It's like, yeah, they're like rehashing a lot of stuff in this episode. Well, like 2 or 3 things. So when this happens, maybe that's why they mentioned this, because Goering has a military hold on these territories, like in this case, Austria and Czechoslovakia, right, and France. But then what Himmler and Heydrich are attempted, it's kind of like, to me, it's kind of like an order. First, Goering comes in with the military, and then Heydrich and Himmler come in with their guys, with the SS, and intelligence services, like trying to keep like order and to Germanize the people, as they say. And then eventually, I would assume Goebbels would come in. Goebbels starts it at home with the propaganda, and then it's Goering with the military, then it's Heydrich and Himmler with the SS and the intelligence services, and then I would assume at the end it would be Goebbels again with the cultural propaganda, right? That would be like the order of a takeover of territories. So at this point, they do insinuate that how Heydrich is going to get sent because he has control over Czechoslovakia later on. And they say, Goebbels says that they play like, that he plays like a cat and mouse game with the Czechs. And he's good at it supposedly, but even though that they try to assassinate him and they basically succeed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, so the idea here is that Himmler wants to Germanize Poland as soon as Poland gets invaded in September 1939. And this is where the term Lebensraum comes in. So whenever they talk about the Nazi objectives, you can't leave out Lebensraum. And Lebensraum basically means like free space or more space for the German people, where they're basically going to take away all of the undesirables. They're going to push them out of their territory, the Jews, the people that they don't like, and make way for the German people. Because ultimately what the Nazi party wanted was like like a German world, I'm guessing, and they wanted to start with Europe, something like that. So Himmler wants to expel everyone, basically. The SS moves into occupied territory, and Himmler's power basically increases at this point, right? Because he's in charge of so many things. Excuse me. Heydrich has his SD, his secret intelligence services. So I forgot about this part, but yeah, like Goering has the Gestapo, Himmler has the SS. You know, everyone has their. Rome had his SA, the stormtroopers. And in this case, I forgot that Heydrich has his SD. That's why he actually got hired into the Nazi Party, because they needed to build a secret intelligence service, which is under Heydrich's command, right? And they say he's an ideologue, but he's a practical ideologue. He's not a dreamer. He's a person that imagines things and gets them done. So he's dangerous in that sense, right? So then we jump back to Munich, 1931, where they say it wasn't always that way. Heydrich was unemployed and desperate at that point. And due to this love triangle, which they already mentioned before and I talked about before in my review of earlier episodes, he was involved in a love triangle. He was basically engaged to two women, and he rejected the wrong woman, because that woman's father was in charge of the naval services or something like that. So he got discharged. And they say not so much because of the affair, but because he expressed contempt. So he was like, he had an attitude basically. So then the depression hits, right? So he's in a very bad position right before he gets hired by the Nazi Party. And then the woman he chooses is called Lena von Osten, and she's a supporter of the Nazi Party. So again, through connections, she gets the interview. She gets Heydrich an interview with Himmler, and Himmler is impressed by the way that he's speaking. Again, they mentioned this part that they already mentioned before, that he has no intelligence experience, that he's only read like thriller spy novels when he was a kid, and he uses that to basically lie to Himmler, and Himmler is impressed. So, and then they say that he learns on the job, and he becomes like the right-hand man of Himmler, right? So Heydrich, and then they remind us of how Heydrich carried out the attack against the SA in Rome back in 1934, something called the Night of the Long Knives, and how Rome was the godfather of one of Heydrich's kids. So, just so you get an idea of how cold Heydrich is, and being a Pisces, you could say like he was imaginative, and he was basically like, like towards his objective, right? Like in a very wise way, I guess you could say, because he's the last zodiac sign. Pisces is the last zodiac sign, so it's the wisest of all the signs, right? So they know if they want to get something done, they know how to get it done, right? What actually works against them is like their laziness or their sickness, right? They're prone to illness. But yeah, so he does this. And yeah, this is also Rome was the godfather of one of Heydrich's kids. They say this is so you can get an idea of just how the Nazi Party did not care if you were related. Like, for the party's objectives, they were willing to go, all the means, all the way. So the SS, they also attribute the SS's success to the way that Heydrich and Himmler worked really well together. They mentioned how Heydrich was like the person that would get things done, like the practical person, and Himmler would be like the social person that would have like people that would be gathering people and doing all these like Libra oriented things, right? Himmler was a Libra. So then we go back to January 1939, where Heydrich is in charge of the police, and Goering instructs Heydrich to take care of the Jewish question, right? Now they say that they get very vague up to this point about what to do with like all of these people that they don't like, right? Because they're racist, because they're not yet killing them. We're gonna get into that right now, why they start killing them. And it's actually like in a weird way. They get into specifics as to how the Holocaust came about, right? Like this is all pre-Holocaust. So Goering instructs Heydrich to take care of the Jewish question. because Poland has 2 million Jews. But again, getting rid of the Jewish problem or the Jewish people was very vague, right? It was like, but what do we do, right? So they say that the interpretation is basically left up to Heydrich, right? So there's a group that comes in here. It's a special SS group. They're called the Einsatzgruppen, the Einsatzgruppen, and these guys are key to what would eventually become the Holocaust, which it actually doesn't start as a group meaning to kill like the Jewish people, even though the Nazis were racist all the time. But the Einsatzgruppen is actually a special SS group or special SS groups that when they take over Poland, they are assigned basically to kill like the Polish elite, the Polish professors, the Polish priests, the Polish economists, the Polish leaders. Basically, anybody that has influence, power, control, that's a leader in Poland, they're in charge of taking those people out because they view them as enemies, right? And it would make sense in war, right? Where you're like, you take over a territory and you either imprison your rivals, right? Or you kill them. Okay, now this group starts to work in this way, basically in all of the territories that the Nazis start to take over. So they take over France, they take over Czechoslovakia, they take over wherever, and an Einsatzgruppen group gets sent there to start doing this job of killing the opposition, of killing their enemies, basically. So they have no resistance in those places, right? Okay, now that's key. That's key for the Holocaust, right? We'll come back to them later. Okay, so they say September 21st, 1939, in Poland, they start to lay the groundwork for what would become systematic measures later on, right? And they start to, so far they're not killing the Jewish people at this point. They're moving them, they're moving all the undesirables, all the people that they don't like, and along with the Jewish people, they're putting them in urban ghettos, right? They're cramming them into like these tiny rooms, right? And this is in the early 1940. They're cramming them in these urban ghettos called the general government zones, right? And of course, this is Heydrich's idea, and he has no concern for temporary. Well, okay, let me say this again. He has no concern for the people, you know, like their physical well-being. Are they being fed? Are they being bathed? You know, how are they living? Their living conditions. He has no concern for them because he says these are just temporary measures. We're just doing this in the meantime, right? And at this point, everybody's just kind of like, yeah, we don't like them, but we don't really know what to do with them, right? So he messes with this guy called Hans Frank. Hans Frank is basically the guy, the Nazi leader in charge of Poland, of the Polish area, of the Polish territory, and he doesn't like it. He doesn't like what Heydrich is doing, not so much because he's humane and he's like, you know, why are you making these people suffer? Why are you moving them, right? Not so much because of that, but because he's like, you're creating a dumping ground in my cities, in my territory. You know, what are you doing, Heydrich, right? So, and he's also friends with Goering. So Goering calls both Himmler, I'm saying Himmler in this case, yeah, he calls in. So there are like 4 people involved right here: Hans Frank, Himmler, Goering, and Heydrich. Himmler comes in the scene because they say that Himmler and Goering basically hate each other, or they're rivals. I'm not sure why. I don't remember why, but again, they say this throughout the episodes. Like, these people just hated each other. They were rivals, but they offer very little evidence to support those claims. Okay, so then Goering ends up basically telling Himmler, Heydrich, and Hans that there will be no further deportations, no further movement of people, unless Hans Frank says it's good, right? And then at this point, they say Goering is the minister of the economy. And I was like, didn't they say that Bormann was in charge of the finances? I'm not sure if he was the minister of the economy. But at this point, they're saying that Goering is the minister of the economy. I'm not sure why. I thought it was Bormann. But anyway, so Heydrich is stuck with this problem of like, what do I do with the Jewish people, right? Okay, anyway, we're in April, so they start taking over Norway and Denmark up north, then France, Luxembourg, all of those places that I already mentioned last episode or in the last couple of episodes. They also mentioned how Heydrich is a pilot and he actually flies like a couple of missions during World War II. And they're just like, yo, this is risky behavior. Like, why are you even doing this if you're an important person in the Nazi party? Like, why are you fighting in the war, right? You don't have to be fighting in the war. And basically, at this point, Europe is under like Nazi control, right? We go back to how they take over France, but this is important because he gets an idea here. What Heydrich wants to do as soon as they take France, France, I guess, had control of the island of Madagascar down in the east coast, off the east coast of Africa. So, what Heydrich basically wants to do is like send the Jewish people there to the island, right? And in his plans is the idea of like Jewish people basically dying on the way there, right? Because of the conditions, and maybe dying when they get there because Europeans living, like all of a sudden moving to Madagascar, I guess they say that it was that it's not good, right? That you would probably die because of the weather conditions, and just basically the conditions that Heydrich had the Jewish people and all of these people in, right? Um, so yeah, that's his idea, but they have a problem. They have an obstacle, which is the British Navy. Now the British Navy gets in the way because it can't guarantee. The British Navy would probably interfere with the voyage, so they can't guarantee safe passage. Um, which again, if they're trying to get rid of the Jewish people, I don't know why they wouldn't use this, and just basically like blame the British. Like, look, the British are shooting down, they're like attacking our ships, and the Jewish people are dying. But I don't know. I guess they don't want to do that. Um, and this is like just to stop a little bit and pause a little bit and say, the British, they couldn't take the British on. The Luftwaffe, the Nazi party couldn't take on the British, right? And actually, the Czechs that end up assassinating or doing the assassination attempt on Heydrich were trained by British intelligence. So it just goes to show you, and it's like the British, man, have been around since like colonial empire, since Pax Britannica, since they were like a world power. It's like these guys are serious business. Like, you're not just gonna take them out, you know, like that. Where they actually say Goering, at this point in July 1940, we go back to this idea. Goering promises Hitler that he can bring Britain to its knees, but he meets stiff resistance, right? Basically because they don't have intelligence on the British weak points. The British are very well organized, very well prepared, and Goering and the Nazis don't know what they're doing basically in England. Plus, they also talk about the long range operations that they have to do since the British are on the defensive, and the Nazis are on the offensive. You can see where that would be a problem, right? They need to fly across the English Channel into England, and the British are not having it. So it's a personal disaster both for Goering and militarily speaking for the Nazis. And Hitler starts to distrust Goering because of this. By October 1940, the Battle of Britain is over, and Heydrich's Heydrich's plan to send the Jewish people to Madagascar is basically over, because they lost to the British basically at this point. So then Hitler shifts his attention to the east, and his idea is basically like, well, if we can take over the Soviet Union, once we have Russia, the Soviet Union, all of that territory, all of Europe, England is going to have to fall in line, basically. And Goering is like, no, let's not do that, right? Like, let's just focus on England right now because England is our priority. And I think maybe I think there are a couple things that basically start to that start the beginning of the end for the Nazis, right? And this might have been one of them, right, where they focus on the Soviet Union instead of just focusing on England, because again they're fighting two battles on two fronts, right? Um, okay, so they say the Soviet Union has resources. Goering doesn't like this idea about going to the Soviet Union, but he keeps quiet. And on June 22nd, 1941, Operation Barbarossa starts, which is the invasion of the Soviet Union by the Nazis, right? So Himmler and Heydrich like it, and this is basically where they go crazy. This is where Heydrich goes crazy, and Himmler, because they view the Bolsheviks, the Soviets, and specifically the Jewish Bolsheviks, that is the Jewish Soviets, as like the enemy of National Socialism, right? Which is what they stand for. So they say they are the enemies, and they even talk about how in the Eastern Front, like the rules that would normally apply at other places aren't going to apply here. Like there are basically no rules. Um, so again, this is where the Einsatzgruppen comes in, right? The people that would go into the territories to eliminate all of the leaders, all of the people with influence in those territories, because those people, right, Heydrich's forces, they basically go in and they start killing like all civilians, right? Like the Jewish men, women, children. And this is the moment where they basically say they move from a territory solution, right? Like how to get rid of them, how to move them to another part, right? They basically go from a territorial solution to a genocidal solution, right? Like let's just kill them, right? And again, they're using the people that would initially go in to kill like the leaders or the people with influence of the territories that they were in, to now just killing like the people that they don't like in general, right? Specifically like the Jewish people and all others, undesirables, they would say. So at this point, the final solution comes into play. Heydrich he goes to Goering and he gets Goering to sign it. Again, the language is vague. And Heydrich, what he ultimately wants is complete control of this program. He doesn't want to be questioned. He doesn't want to be challenged. He doesn't want to be, facing opposition within the party. He wants complete control of this program. He wants that assurance that he will be in charge of it. And then we go to, but at this point, now we go all the way back to Munich, 1932, where Heydrich was actually getting questioned as to whether he was from Jewish descent. Not so much because he came from a Jewish family household, but, because his grandma supposedly had divorced and then remarried a Jewish man. And this was all to discredit his father, Bruno Heydrich. But his father disproved it. He disproves it, right? And but they say it's still iffy because, Hitler, the Nazi party, they're distrustful. They're like, whoa, like, but Himmler backs him up at that point in 1932, and it's all good. So they talk now. We go to August 1941 in Latvia, where basically mass murder starts to happen. They round up a lot of Jewish people. They march them out to a field. They make them dig trenches. They shoot them in the head, and then they basically do that repeatedly, right? They do that at all the German fronts. And see, for me, this is the part where like maybe they started doing this because of like the Nazis' like hatred, not only to the Jewish people but to the Russians, to the Soviets. So they had like a combination of the two types of people that they hated in one. Like the Soviet Jewish people, and they just went all out, right? They just went all crazy at this point. So Heydrich and Himmler at this point, they think they're going to be rewarded. And a ravine near Kiev in Ukraine gets associated with mass murder. They also talk about the Babi Yar executions, which basically this is like the beginning again of the Holocaust, September 1941. 33,000 Jewish people are shot dead. And at this point, the Fuhrer, Hitler, decides that Russia or the Soviet Union will go to civilians and not to the SS, right? So back at Czechoslovakia, they're talking about the protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, I think, where there's resistance activity to the Nazi party, right? So there are like groups that are resisting Nazi invasion. And at this point, like, Heydrich gets to work, but he needs like Hitler's approval. So I guess he goes through Bormann. Bormann's in charge of everything there. And then like Heydrich makes up lies that Prague is out of control. And Bormann decides to back him up because he wants more power. Hitler gets mad at what's going on in Prague, and he says, yes, go ahead. So in September 1941, in the Prague castle, Heydrich goes in, and again, he starts killing people. He takes control, which was his MO, I guess. And Heydrich improves conditions for the workers, and the Czechs basically stop resisting. They don't join, but I guess they like that's where I mentioned earlier that Goebbels says that he played like a cat and mouse game. I think it was Goebbels that said that. Well, they say it at one point in the episode. So the Czechoslovakian workers start, going back to work. Production is up. The resistance is stomped basically because of what Heydrich does in Czechoslovakia. So Heydrich is popular. Goebbels is impressed, right? Goering distrusts Heydrich at this point because he's like, yo, he's doing a good job doing what he's doing. He's cold-blooded. He's effective. He's efficient. And Bormann takes subtle credit. So they talk about how that's like really old politics, like people doing things and, trying to impress the leader at this point, like Hitler. And Heydrich now reports directly to Hitler. So they say that this is like the beginning of a rivalry between Himmler and Heydrich, right? Then we jump to January 20th, 1942, which is very important date, the Wannsee Conference. It's a meeting with top-rank officials from the Nazi Party, and it's chaired by Heydrich. And he has two objectives here. His first objective is to gain control of anti-Jewish policies, and his second objective is to coordinate the implementation of the final solution. So he's going to move 11 million people at this point, and he wants to make it clear that he's in charge. And they basically start deporting the Jewish people to the Eastern Front. And they, again, the language is vague. They say they're not killing them, but they're not coming back. And at this point, they're full-blown in industrial genocide planning. The purpose, they start to build purpose-built camps. And by March 17th, 1942, so just January, February, March, just like 2 months later, the first gas chamber, I guess, is opened in Belzec in Poland, and it's operational. And in 3 months, 80,000 people are basically killed. So very bad stuff, very dark stuff. This is a heavy episode. Then we go to Prague, 1942. Heydrich celebrates as basically overlord of the Czechs and the architect of the final solution. So he's like on cloud nine. He's having a good time. And they actually say that Heydrich was very social at this point. He's at a party. He's very social. He's playing music, his father's music, because he was very happy of what he had done. And he's actually expected in Berlin the next day to take charge now of like the Western Front, right? To basically go do what he did in the Eastern Front, now go do it in the Western Front, right? Because they say that the Western Front at this point was militarily controlled. And again, I think that's how they would go in, take over a territory militarily, but then they would have to reduce military presence and eventually make it livable for people, right? You're not going to be there with military people all around you. Or I'm not sure, if maybe I'm mistaken with that idea. But anyway, May 27, 1942, so March, April, May, just 2 months after that, outside of Prague, Heydrich is driving around in an open top car. He's going to the airport, or to take the plane to go to Berlin. And then a man points a gun at him. I guess the gun jams, so he doesn't shoot him. Heydrich goes for his gun. And the second assassin, he throws a bomb under his car, and the bomb explodes, right? Himmler at this point sends his personal physician, but Heydrich supposedly is okay 7 days later. But then out of nowhere, he goes into shock, he goes into a coma, and he dies, right? He never recovers from that coma. Later, they say that the Czechs, the people that were the assassins, were Czechs, people from Czechoslovakia, trained by British intelligence. But then there's like conspiracies about how Himmler wanted to take him out because Heydrich could have been a threat. The historians go as far as to say that he could have been the Fuhrer. He could have been like another Hitler, because they say that he was so ideologically driven, just like Hitler. So he could have been a leader easily. He was very clever, and this is the first time that one of the inner circle members is assassinated. So the Nazi party is pissed. They go and they detect two villages that were related with like a resistance, and they wipe them out completely. I think it was Lidice and Lesaski. They kill 500 civilians, men, women, children, and some of them are sent to concentration camps. But they say that it wasn't really a conspiracy. At this point, it was just simply that modern medicine couldn't save him, and he just died from his wounds from the explosion, from the assassination attempt. And they say for Himmler, his idea is basically like continue what Heydrich started, which is Operation Reinhard, which is the extinction or the genocide of 6 million people, right? So this episode deals a lot with Heydrich's, like it's called, rise and fall, how he came up, what he did, his racist policies, contributions, and his planning of the concentration camps, his planning of the Holocaust, basically, and basically his death, right? Which, like, what would have happened if he wouldn't have died, right? Like, he could have done even more damage. I don't know. But these type of things, 1942, 1941, 1942, I think in 1942, winter of 1941, 1942 is when like the Soviets start to fight back against the Nazis. And that's like a turning point, I think. The first turning point, obviously, is, not being able to take over England. That's a turning point. That's a failure militarily and personally for Goering, and personally for the Nazis. But then they try to take over the Soviet Union, and they can't. Heydrich dies, and then from here on, I guess, is just the beginning of the end, right? There's a turnaround. I was listening to like this teacher say, if Hitler would have stopped when he took over Poland, or Czechoslovakia, like maybe he would have been regarded as a hero in history, but they just kept going for more and more and more, and they wanted more and more and more, and that, they say pride comes before the fall, right? So I don't know. Let me know what you guys think about this episode, this review, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, peace.